Okay, this episode of Tasteland is coming to you a day late, and it's my fault. And I have to fess up. I am not.
That's not your fault.
It's not my fault. It's, could have been avoided with carefuler planning and research, but I'm on the road this week. I'm in Tucson, and my Airbnb's Wi-Fi went out while we were recording yesterday. So this episode is coming to you a day late. So sorry to let you thousands of loyal Tasteland residents down. But we're back one day late. So we're talking about magazines today. More so the inevitable reinvention of the magazine from cycle to cycle, tech cycle to tech cycle. But first, let's talk a little bit about our personal magazine purchasing habits. So I used to be a big, stop in at iconic magazines or whatever bookstore and buy like Apartmento or the Travel Almanac or like years ago, like Purple. And then I would buy these magazines for $50 and then read one or two articles and then put them on my bookshelf. So I am actually subscribed to one magazine right now, though, which is unsurprisingly to regular listeners of this podcast, a soccer magazine called Mundial, which the latest issue came right before I shipped out to Tucson. It's one of those things where I just like to. It was $50 for a year, right? And it's just fun to pick up. It's fun to, I don't know. Enough about me though. What are you buying magazines these days? Are you subscribed? Are you picking them up in store?
I very rarely pick them up in store. And this hasn't happened in a while unless I've written for something and I have to go find it. And I think it's because
they don't
for
send
years,
them to you.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah.
For years, I never paid for magazines. My roommate worked for New York Magazine. My last roommate before I lived alone worked for New York Magazine. So I would always get that for free through her. When I worked at Time Inc., they would put out the latest issue of every Time Inc. publication on the floor.
I'm a big New York Mag online reader. I've never held even a physical issue.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
No, I think it's part of the conversation. They would just put them out on the floor that magazine operated off of. So if you wanted to get, you could just go to floor and get every new issue. And actually, I have still saved from this very specific period in time. It was when David Bowie, Prince, and I think Muhammad Ali died. You know how they're like celebrity deaths come in three? Those three were very memorable. And that was the time period I was working at Time Inc. So I have saved the Time cover and the People cover
of each death
and Sports Illustrated commemorating those deaths. And they're still under my bed somewhere. But because I was always getting them for free, I don't think I cultivated a habit of buying them. Yeah. I believe that I know my husband subscribes to the New Yorker. So we get the New Yorker to our house. And I think that I am subscribed to Paris Review unless I let it lapse, which
my girlfriend is a subscriber.
Yeah. And that is
I love what they did with the rebrand. That was like a year ago, 2 years ago now, where now it's like a book.
Yes. And it's the artwork's always incredible. And beautifully designed. I usually leave it out. And I do read it.
I just literally read the first short story in the latest one last night.
Who is that by?
I could not tell you. I do not remember, but I could tell you what it was about. But I don't need to.
Well, no, we don't need to do that right now. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said Apartmento though, because I do follow the Instagram. I think it's a beautiful magazine, and it's surprising that I've never actually picked one up.
I actually, with those, sometimes I haven't bought one in a little while because the last two I'd bought, I didn't read much of, but the two before that I did read cover to cover because I love interviews. I am a sucker for the interview in any medium.
It is like a looking at pictures thing though, too.
It is. Yeah. It's
a looking at
I wish
pictures
my
magazine.
House looked like that.
But I have a lot of childhood memories of my parents. On a half day, I would walk to the public library so my mom wouldn't have to leave work to pick me up. And then I would just go straight to dance class. And I would just sit there for hours and read 17, Cosmo, Teen Vogue. And it was such a visceral experience. The way the paper feels, the way that they smell, that feeling of cracking a magazine has really never left me. And I think most people who have that feeling or a lot of people who try to enter magazines as a career do so
Yeah.
because they have that strong emotional resonance with the actual object. And so like we've talked about this before, it's like, how do you recreate that experience in a digital environment? And I think what makes it so hard is the experience is mediated by the platforms themselves.
Yeah.
Even in a system of direct distribution, so like an email newsletter,
Such as Dirt.
You could be using a service that sees itself as more than just the infrastructure, which I think kind of goes back to our conversation about Substack with Casey Lewis.
Yeah.
But when I kind of pitched this episode to you, because we weren't going to have a guest, I was thinking about an article, or I guess a blog post from a site called Background Noise called The End of Advertising. Up around the same time that I saw this article, I saw a big splashy social media announcement for a new startup. I don't remember the name. I'm not concealing the name out of propriety. I don't remember, but basic concept is any influencer who has like a bunch of inbound to do product commercials basically to their audience can create an AI generated commercial using their own image to basically like increase their own productivity and bandwidth, like personal bandwidth to show products. So you're no longer like, I mean, at a philosophical level, your productivity is no longer tied to your embodied image. Yeah. You're allowing your image to go out and do these commercials without you,
like a shadow.
Basically. But I sent it to my friend Maya, who's also my investor, and I said, this is hilarious because they're speed running the acceleration of the death of digital advertising, and they're going to have to reinvent magazines as a result. Like, this is coming in and saying we're disrupting digital advertising. They're going to kill digital advertising because it's not even just the reputational thing of like, how does a consumer then perceive or distrust the stuff that they're seeing? It's that the infrastructure of platforms where you encounter a digital ad right now are not designed to support that volume of advertising. And in fact, like with the introduction of TikTok Shop and changes in the Instagram algorithm, people already feel like they're at capacity with the amount of ads they see and can pay attention to. Now you could say the corollary, pie in the sky, crazy VC corollary is the contrarian view, allow consumers to license their attention through a digital avatar that will then fulfill that, it'll be the corollary
AI
to
consuming AI.
Yeah, AI consuming AI. Again, though, in an environment, if you believe we're in the taste economy, AI consuming AI projects, companies, startups have no value.
No.
Because there's nowhere for that value to accrue other than potentially the deep tech. And we can get into that a little bit later.
This is like there are those things where it's like I can't think of any examples, but like I know there's apps where it's like you get points by consuming and interacting. I mean, this is different, but kind of like when we were talking to Ty Haney about Try Your Best the other day, little different than that. But like there are these things where like you get paid in like little points or coins, like to keep clicking or to like watch these videos or whatever. So like there, like that can create value, right? Like, I mean, not greatly, but people are gamifying these kinds of things.
Well, and people are gamifying them by setting up bots that ultimately accrue back to the bot master. But there's also a lot of instances, very sad instances of people basically farming out the high volume gamification of platforms to people in third world countries.
Yeah.
Where they can ultimately make a ton of revenue off of like having people do all of these like tedious clicking, and it inflates the value of companies where they just show traffic or on-chain activity, which is not really a new problem. It's actually easier to detect that in a blockchain environment than it was to detect in inflated like SEO metrics for certain companies.
Well,
Like
this is
I
like,
worked at one,
yeah.
International Business Times. You would consider it like an SEO farm,
Hmm.
basically. Um, but most of like what made it like a gray area was most of the people coming in from Google to this clickbait were real people.
Hmm.
But there were ways to tell when it wasn't
Yeah.
real people.
Clicking
And that
patterns.
becomes a legal issue if you're selling advertisers a certain number of impressions. So
Yes.
when
Yes.
I don't want to misremember, I'm not going to say which publication I was working at because the details are a little fuzzy. I remember coming in and being the first person to audit Google Analytics in a while. And
Mm.
I was like, hey guys, we're getting significant traffic from such and such third world country.
Yeah.
Like, just not the audience demographic for this publication. And there was like an immediate response like, this is a problem. We got to shut whatever this down. Like, if somebody set this up somewhere within the company, we have to shut it down because that's how publications get sued by advertisers.
Yeah, this was a strange thing actually. Just the other day on Creator Spotlight, I was like, I'd gotten like 6 replies to like the welcome email we send out from
Mm-hmm.
all. It was all the same name,
Mm-hmm.
but I went. I was like, how did this one person sign up the same like with the same name like 6 times replying? And I checked, and over the course of 2 days, the same name had signed up 11 times, but
Mm-hmm.
with the same email address, except like the domain at the end was like dot support or dot
Uh,
xyz
mm-hmm.
or dot com, like all these. And I'm actually still not sure what was happening there and like
Mm-hmm.
what they were doing, what they were trying to get out of this. But like exactly like how do I don't know how to tell if this is like a valuable subscribe. Like maybe I track them, maybe I just unsubscribe them, I don't know, but like do I track them and make sure that they're opening it, but then a bot could be opening it? I don't know. It gets My point is just that yeah, it's fraud.
Yeah, it is fraud. But I wanted to get back to this blog post. So after I
Yeah,
see
the end
this
of
startup
advertising.
and I jokingly tell my people are investing in this, they might get their bag before this completely kills digital
Hmm.
advertising. But the problems are inherent in the business model. Anyone can see down the road to say what's going to happen. It basically like you can't create something like that without also basically like if that company succeeds, they will put themselves out of business type thing.
Yeah.
So in this blog post, The End of Advertising, it uses the phrase revealed preferences early on, which made me really
Mhm.
happy because I say that on this
You
podcast a
do.
lot.
Canonical
Basically,
term of this pod.
the author saying, people say they don't like ads, but their revealed preference shows otherwise because they
Yeah.
prefer free content and they would rather give up their attention than pay money for content. So I was
Hmm.
like, yes, I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but I think it's an important thing to acknowledge that like this has been the case for a while. It's still kind of the case. Could it change if we're giving up our attention to uh, in a way that's like doesn't feel tenable or with any plausible idea that like the ad that's being fed has touched human hands at any point? Like, yes, of course it could change. And then I highlighted this quote. Yeah, so basically, without ads, we'd have to pay for content with our hard earned dollars, but with ads, we pay with our attention and we perceive the
Hmm.
cost of the content as free.
That's free.
The article then goes on to talk about slop filler, whatever you want to call it, in the same way that
Max
you
Reed
know,
and Garbage Day have been talking
Ryan
about,
Broderick,
and
yeah,
us. Yeah.
Max Reed and Ryan Broderick have recently talked about, and comes to the conclusion that we've talked about on this podcast before, that the value will now accrue to media companies that essentially create containers where within that container, and you could think of a magazine as like one of the kind of oldest forms of
Hmm.
containers. Within that container, what you're paying for and experiencing is worth your attention in
Yeah.
exchange. Not only worth your attention, but worth your money
Okay,
in
wait.
exchange.
This attention thing. This so when yesterday when we tried to record this podcast and then my Wi-Fi failed, this was actually the kind of point I was getting to that is worth bringing
Okay.
up briefly here. So this idea of like what responsibility does a creator have to their audience, to themselves, to their advertisers, to their platforms. I was thinking about it a lot as I've been working on this essay yesterday after we tried to record. And I think my most cynical view is that like the only responsibility the creator has that is shared, that the responsibility they have to themselves, to their audience, and to their advertisers and or the platforms that they're using to distribute the content, the only shared responsibility maybe is making the content hold attention. And because like the responsibility to themselves is, attention is how you monetize. So the responsibility to their advertiser is, again, attention is how you monetize, and the responsibility to the audience is producing something that can hold their attention, whether that's, just a like really highly edited Instagram reel that you can't scroll away from, or it's a essay or article that's like really engaging. Like, I don't know, maybe it's not so profound, but that was like, it felt, I don't know if it felt like dark or if it just felt like neutrally true, that like that's the only responsibility in the creator economy, is to produce something that holds attention.
So, okay, this is interesting. This question of, okay, well, obviously selling out attention, I think can only lead to this extreme logical conclusion, which is like consumers watching bot ads. And somebody might say like, so what? Like somebody could make money off of that theoretically.
I'm sure thousands of dollars are being made off of that while we speak here.
Absolutely. Well, and maybe more than thousands. That's fine. Like somebody being able to make money off of that is not mutually exclusive with the conclusion that the end of advertising comes to, which is like basically media becomes a luxury product. It's the end of the sort of free and open internet. That was not the end state of the internet. It actually was just a blip, sort of like the blip in the economy that we talked about with Joe last week. That like there is a window of time where there's a certain confluence of platforms funding, legal, politics, whatever, where like most content on the internet was free. We're now realizing that was not going to last forever, because each of these containers being created technically represents an enclosure of the commons. Also, if you're following like what's going on with Internet Archive, Internet Archive is now sort of, under threat. So that these containers where people are paying for content, media is seen as like almost a luxury bespoke product, things that I've talked about doing with Dirt and have heard other smart people talk about, could be a much smaller percentage of the internet. But even if the volume of pixels, money, capital made off of bots watching bots dwarfs this other kind of enclosed bespoke internet, the slop will never have status. And without status, there's no power. Like as we were sitting here, I just Googled, like as an example in a different industry, what is the annual revenue of Shein versus the annual revenue of LVMH? Shein, according to a quick Google, could be wrong. We don't trust Google anymore.
No, well, we don't trust Shein anyways. So,
do you want to guess?
The total revenue for like last year?
Shein.
Yeah. I'm gonna guess 7.3 billion.
So it's 30 billion. LVMH is 130 billion.
Oh my God. Selling so much less volume.
So much less volume, but with a lot more care.
Yeah.
And a lot more spending, probably along that supply chain to get there. Now, somebody might say, $30 billion sounds great to me. And all I have to do is operate a bot farm.
Yeah.
You're 130 billion, like that. You're actually the sucker, because look how much effort you're putting in. But that's why I think when status comes into play and you say like, it's not just about where capital is going to accrue. It's where status is going to accrue, because power can only come from environments that have status, and that's what creates influence. And this also came up
power
with Joe.
Like roots and leverage, really.
Yeah, we were talking about this with Joe, where the media ecosystem is impoverished compared to Silicon Valley, but people still want to be in the New York Times. People still want to be in the New Yorker. People still care, what's on CNN. And like you could say, well, 4 out of 5 of Spotify's top podcasts are right-leaning podcasters. Sure, but these institutions still have power and influence. And Joe Rogan, like God bless him, I don't know that we would say that he has status.
Yeah, he's still outsider no matter how big he is.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, really quickly. So, how do you define magazine in the way that we kind of started this conversation? Because in my mind, I want to make sure we're on the same page. Like in my mind, it's like a container, a contained media product that is made up of more than one person. Like it has to
Yes,
be
I
at least an
agree.
editor and one writer, like at the very least.
A container for taste that embodies an editorial point of view that is not
Yeah.
the point of view of one individual, but could be
Yes.
heavily influenced by
Well said.
the point of
Yeah.
view of one individual.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use that
Like Graydon
definition,
Carter or Daisy
Graydon
Almeida.
Carter, please, Anna Wintour,
Uh-huh.
Edward Enninful, like,
Yes. But the point being that like a Joe Rogan then doesn't have that. Like the magazine comes with some like cachet of taste because like it's predicated on this like this kind of yes, the one person's taste, but also like multiple tastes coming together. But then like the Joe Rogan podcast, even though it's like I don't know how many people work for it, probably dozens, right? But like it's still
oh,
just
maybe
the Joe
even more.
Rogan
I mean, do you know
thing.
how many people work for Mr. Beast?
Oh yeah, it's like isn't it like 700
I don't
actually?
know.
I
They're
think
like making their own town.
I think it's 700. Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah. And I think, but like that definition that we just came up with is not
Mhm.
mutually exclusive with something being digital. Um, but I would say this definition would disqualify most Substacks,
Yeah,
which we
well,
sort of got into in the Casey conversation.
yeah. So, I mean, yesterday, right, Taylor Lorenz announced that
Mhm.
she's leaving the Washington Post and starting User Magazine on Substack,
Yeah.
which she says will initially just be her, but she would like to add contributors over time and expand it to other mediums. So, I
Mhm.
think this is a thing. I've done this too with like just little like fun, just for myself newsletters I've like spun up where I've called it
Mhm.
like X Magazine. So people the word here is maybe being used and abused, and like I believe that Taylor Lorenz will probably within months have like other people working. Maybe there's already like editorial people she's working with, whatever, but not really a magazine until it's like she expands. And also, I think Substack itself is a magazine.
Well, I mean, they define themselves out of convenience
Yeah.
based on where they're getting criticism.
Hmm.
If they're getting criticism for being a platform disruptor that doesn't really have a stake in the quality of what they publish, then they start to position themselves more as a publisher.
Hmm.
If in positioning themselves more as a publisher, they leave themselves open to criticism of the quality of what's on there and some of the more controversial opinions, then they position themselves more as the infrastructure. But I will say, to go back to the magazine
Yeah.
metaphor, and I feel this very strongly, and I have this in my list of things to talk about. I went out back and was reading about the history of timing and Condé Nast. A lot of things I already do. There's some fun,
What
surprising
do you
things
mean you
in
went
there.
out back? Sorry.
Did I say out back?
Yeah. I'm just
I
imagining
think
you like
I
out on the ranch. Sorry.
I think I meant to say I went back and
You did. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't, maybe there's a slip of my own ear. Anyways.
no, I misspoke. I'm sorry.
Mhm. Forgiven.
I there's no point in the history of these companies where they were like Vogue by like X printing press that you've never fucking heard of.
Yeah.
And since I never noticed this till Casey brought it up, but I've been thinking about it so much that like, yeah, there's now these like roundups on traditional sites like Vogue and Elle. It's just like the top. This is what fashion substackers are buying.
Yes.
And if I was trying to run an independent media company off that platform, I would be livid
Yeah.
to have something that I consider
Because now your
infrastructure.
magazine has been eaten up by a larger one.
Exactly. Exactly. That does not fit really. I mean, to me, it does not fit the definition of a magazine because there's no coherent point of view.
Yeah.
And when there's no coherent point of view, you cannot maintain an audience. You just can't. You can maintain pockets of audience, but any media company has eventually failed. And most of the recent failures happened because of the pressures of traffic and scale. They failed because they were chasing traffic to the extent that they no longer had a coherent point of view. And when you no longer have a coherent point of view, you no longer have an audience. You no longer have the attention of the audience that you've had up until that point. I really believe that. So I think muddying these waters is not going to end well. And I think Substack can still succeed as a company, as a technology company. But I do think people who are interested in taking advantage of this moment in editorial and the sort of like process that we're all seeing, which is like we have an opportunity to define our projects in as a counterpoint to filler and slop,
Mm-hmm.
that they're not going to be able to really enact that containment on a platform like Substack
Yeah.
for these reasons.
Okay, something I want to bring up quickly too from the Taylor Lorenz conversation. I think this was from her post on Substack introducing it. She said, "I also firmly believe that the era of faux neutrality, the view from nowhere style of journalism, is over," which I think dovetails really well with what you're saying, where it's like, which is just about having a point of view, and a magazine is defined by its having a point of view. And maybe when she says, I firmly believe the era of phone neutrality is over, maybe that is more of like a newspaper rather than a magazine type
Yeah.
of journalism. I don't know.
I mean, there was a lot of intermixing between cultural and political journalism, like definitely in the Obama era and
Yeah.
probably earlier. I think when you have this like really strong criticism that the media is too liberal, it seems like the way to counteract that is to like double down on neutrality. But obviously, neutrality is like a moving target. And
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing that figures into these cycles, and there have been cycles of neutrality to non neutrality. I mean, newspapers really became successful and generated revenue at the point, and we kind of talked about this with Village Voice in the back pages,
Yeah.
when they started doing yellow journalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think the periods of time where that hasn't been the case are few and far between, and now seem like the aberration, just like the open internet was actually the aberration here. And I mean, new journalism, Norman Mailer, we've talked about on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast before, even David Foster Wallace, like the period of time when
Rest
magazines
his
were
soul.
really flush,
Mm-hmm.
the benefit was send somebody with a voice and a perspective to cover the Republican convention.
Yeah.
But that is a magazine thing. It's not a newspaper thing.
Mm-hmm.
Newspapers, I think, always had their tabloid section, and then they would just have like this firewall.
They'd be
Um,
separate.
I think she's probably saying that firewall is a little bit of an illusion. But what I want to say about bundling and unbundling is like it's
Yes.
cyclical in the same way that neutrality is cyclical. And the proliferation of these Substacks, I don't want to keep calling out Substack like Patreon.
No,
There's
let's
other
move on from that.
platforms
Yeah,
like this. I mean, you could include Beehive in
You
this.
can
although-
absolutely. Any
Yeah.
of these things that are like, well, I mean, like with Beehive,
But
for example,
Beehive's not going out and saying
that there's this
Beehive creator, such and such.
Beehives,
Like,
yeah. But there is like a it's a let's say it's a more customizable platform than Substack, and how you can like make your emails appear and such.
Mhm.
But like there's still a like definable style, within the limits. So maybe that's part of it. I think, I don't know. But then like it is less defined, less walled in than Substack. But let's move on. Yeah, let's move on from the Substack conversation. I think what you're
you're getting a little sweaty. No. So what I wanted to say though, actually, is now we're seeing people being like, oh, these Substacks should just bundle and offer like a joint subscription. You're seeing projects like Flaming Hydra that are sort of doing that with a bunch of different writers under one title.
No,
Obviously,
we did Dirtbag and somebody else bundled theirs recently. I forget.
Yeah. Dirt's obviously doing that. But with, as an independent company, and like I consider us, like I would like to be a platform ourselves, to the extent that we're also a technology company. But this like bundling thing is like old, right?
Yeah,
like
you're saying it's a pendulum.
Yeah. So like in 2008, this is what I learned when I didn't go out back, but when I went back and read about the history of timing, that in 2008, they launched something called MagHound, which was an internet-based magazine membership service that featured approximately 300 magazine titles from both timing brands and external publishing companies. This playbook, by the way, they ran this playbook again around like Apple News and iPad stuff. I don't know if you remember that. MagHound only lasted until 2012, 4 years.
Do you think that's a matter of timing? Like, do you think that something like that would work better now?
Partially. Yeah, partially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's recession and it was kicked off by the recession. Oh, people don't want to
Mm.
pay.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that you cancel when you lose your job? We don't need 3 different magazine subscriptions. So they were trying to do like a Netflix thing, which, by
Mm-hmm.
the way, gets suggested all the time now as a solution to the amount of subscriptions people are paying for through the creator economy, and not just media subscriptions, like streamers as well.
You know what? You know what I keep coming back to on this. Do you know the
Yes.
term carcinization? Which is
I
it's one.
usually hear it as Balkanification.
Well, yeah. Well,
Balkanization. Is this the same thing?
this is like the opposite. No. This
Oh,
actually,
really?
these
Okay.
are no, but that's what perfect because these are opposites.
It's like
So
carving something up versus,
yeah, no, yeah, exactly. So this is one of those words that's like such like a Reddit word. I feel like in an annoying way, but it's the okay. Where's the definition? It's an example. Carcinization is an example of a phenomenon called convergent evolution, which is when different groups independently involve the same traits. So the example that I was introduced by it from is like the form of a crab was evolved in so many separate ways, where it's like the crab shape and like the crab exoskeleton, whatever. Like this is like a logical evolutionary form that just kept happening because it was the solution to so many problems. And I think, and so yeah, and then so the Balkanization is kind of in a way, in a weird way, the opposite of that, the devolution, I guess. But
a lot of animals are crabs.
Yes, magazines being like the inevitable crab of
bugs
media.
are crabs.
Bugs are
shrimps is
yes.
bugs.
Shrimps is bugs too.
Bugs
shrimp,
is crabs.
And Shrimp Jesus on Facebook.
Right. So by the transitive property, shrimps is crabs. This is the most millennial thing that we've ever. That was Tom, disgusting. Sorry,
I want Tom
guys.
to delete this, but he's not going to.
He's not going to. It's because we didn't speak to him. Tom, can you please?
Oh no. Please, sir, may you delete? Okay, let's stop this.
All right, microaggression.
Okay, but we had a good point going, and I think the carcinization thing, beyond the perhaps overindulgent detour there, I think is relevant to what you're talking about. How like all the like it keeps it's almost too like maybe like with the creator world, it's like you want to go out and be a creator and make your own money, have your own power, etc. But then maybe it gets too cold and you run out of resources, so you have to go back into the bundled world, right?
The bucket of crabs.
The bucket of crabs.
No, that's not what that term really means. But the other thing I want to highlight, this is maybe not relevant, but interesting power that publishing was able to exert. Condé Nast. This was around kind of the mid-century. They went to the Postal Service. This was at the time they had pretty Republican leadership within the publishing house. They went to the Postal Service and were like, we are delivering our magazines more efficiently than you are delivering the mail. Because we break things down into zones in New York City. And this led to the invention of the zip code.
That's insane.
Yeah, I know.
So the media invented the zip code. Time Magazine invented the zip code because they had their own delivery system. They weren't using USPS.
I mean, fact check me if you need to. I did not cross-reference this
fact check you
with the page for zip code. But yeah, the timeline adds up. Yeah, basically they negged the Postal Service into introducing the zip code. Although I think people had probably been proposing something similar for a while. So it's like, a little bit of a crab thing. Really.
Yeah, little bit of a crab thing. You're going to be hearing that often on this podcast.
Yeah, wow, new phrase just dropped. Okay, here's another thing that I think is really emblematic of cycles, and especially like things that feel disruptive at the time that eventually just become integrated into the media industry. So like in the short term, put people out of work and create a lot of changes, but then lead to some other cycle that requires the magazine to, for lack of a better term, be reinvented. And that's the introduction of photography on the covers of the magazine. So up until 1932, Vogue was covering the magazine with fashion drawings and illustrations. Then in 1932, they did their first photo cover. And you can imagine, like, at the time, it was like, okay, if you can take a picture of anything, why have drawings and illustrations at all, right? But there was a similar shift around the time when they went from doing photographs of models to photographs of celebrities on the cover. And that was another kind of existential moment. Obviously, photography did not kill the illustration, illustrated
The
image, the
video
art
star.
image. But I think the way we view illustration now is more bespoke than functional. And
Well,
photography is like functional.
yeah, but now you're just making me think of AI and two recent magazine covers. I don't know if they were the first to be done with AI, but one was, I think it was the Atlantic cover with like,
That was ass.
yeah,
Is that the one that had like no text on it?
yeah, no text, and it's like Trump writing like,
Yeah, an elephant. I was like, yeah. The no text is not like.
But then there was
the
another
no
one.
text or text is not the issue here. The issue is it looks like
It
doo doo
looks like dog
ass.
shit. It looks like elephant shit. Well, but then the other one was like a week or two ago. The London Standard, which is a weekly, had a Keir Starmer AI cover, and it's like, again, like, just, in the aesthetic that these things always have, it has something of this like 50s masculinity to his face, where he's like made to be, and there's like a British flag in the background, there's Big Ben, it's this like patriotism, just, I don't even know if it's another side of the same coin as the Trump one, or just the same side of the same coin.
Yeah. I mean, I had flagged another sort of pivotal moment in Condé Nast history, which is like when they had to start treating their staff as influencers as a counterpoint to the rise of independent influencers. But
because a journalist has to be an influencer to succeed.
But an influencer, well,
this is okay. I have,
yeah,
this is like the last quote I have from Taylor Lorenz, where she was saying, in her Substack post, "I've always operated in a weird liminal space, often labeled as an influencer or content creator as much as a journalist. And I am and have always been both. But the legacy media is not set up for people like me. The truth is that in today's media environment, these distinctions are meaningless. We are all part of the same media ecosystem. We can all have a voice online. These artificial lines were demolished years ago."
I would say the Washington Post has an outdated code of ethics that does not allow somebody like Taylor Lorenz to succeed. At the same time, a lot of influencers or people who aspire to be influencers do not have a functional enough code of ethics to actually succeed in a post AI universe. I think that's what you're getting at with your question of like, what do you think you owe your audience?
Yes,
some of them have thought through it like really well and they do well, and some of them have not. And I think those distinctions will become clearer and clearer.
I say one thing I'll say on that is like, so we usually want to ask people, only like, I would say a minority of the people I've asked have had like a really clear and quick answer. And one of the best ones that springs to mind is Rachel Carton. When I asked her, who writes Link in Bio, excellent newsletter, and she makes, she wouldn't disclose, but she probably makes like a couple 100,000 through subscriptions and ad revenue. She's doing great. And I think the reason that she had such a clear answer to this is part of why her business is thriving. She immediately was like, I absolutely think about this. I think about this all the time. And she said something about how, she feels like that whole like, oh, social media intern attitude is still so prevalent. She's like, I want to advocate for people who work in social media and like further this profession. So she had a really strong, clear answer. But then there's another person who I won't name, but who was more of like an Instagram focused person and was kind of struggling to, she had a ton of Instagram followers, but was struggling to like turn this into a business. And she was like, I don't necessarily know that I have like a specific responsibility to my audience other than to like be transparent about advertiser relationships. And I don't think it was a coincidence that she was struggling to turn it into a business, whereas Rachel, who had such a clear answer, was not.
In startups, you have two types of founders. You have missionaries and mercenaries. Missionaries are mission driven. They know why they're doing what they're doing and who it's for. And they're solving the problem because that's the problem that they're interested in solving. Mercenaries are founders in search of a problem to solve. Both could be very effective, but I think where the mercenary model falls apart is when things become too easy in a certain sector. And if AI tooling makes it very easy for anyone to do the creative work that influencers have made up until this point,
then the price of a
then
mercenary just drops.
And that brings us really, really well to this other tweet that you and I wanted to highlight as part of this conversation, which is Nate O'Brien saying, hot take, the concept of an influencer slash creator will peak in the mid 2020s.
This is a hot take indeed.
And then goes on to say, in quotes, major platforms like YouTube and TikTok only care about creators today because they are the current producers of content. Big tech's number one priority is the consumer, not the creator. If consumers will watch AI generated content, the platforms will happily serve it to them. I think this is a vision of the future in a certain pocket. This is like the Sheen. This is what's going to be happening in like Sheen world of the internet.
Sloptown.
It doesn't explain what's going to be happening in magazine world of the internet. Like Sloptown, yes.
Yeah.
Here, shout out to the Atlantic. Hey guys, next time you do an AI cover, could we get like a Richard Scarry style, like Sloptown, Busy Town
that would be good.
thing where we can see in real time like where everyone's gonna be hanging out.
You should have the Dirt Discord collaborate on one of these and publish it.
We've thought actually about doing collaborative zine. We've done certain things around that. It's funny that you bring it up. I wish I had more bandwidth to do.
Well, don't we all? Well, you could like if you had an AI agent running dirt for you.
I know.
I'm
really working hard, not smart. But I think
only way.
Actually, this same hot take is an adjacent hot take to an essay, which I would not consider a hot take.
Yeah.
But the culmination of deep thinking that went viral. And then I interviewed Anu Leroux, who wrote it. For Dirt. I was actually in the middle of interviewing her already about her tweets because I think they're very enjoyable.
I do love an enjoyable tweet.
Do you love an enjoyable tweet in the morning?
Okay. Well,
so
yes,
this is called The Taste is Eating Silicon Valley, and basically saying that startups will have to have a certain taste level to succeed. It is similar thinking, or it comes from the same line of thinking that I've expressed around the taste economy.
Yeah.
I think
taste, there were saying too that taste separates the missionary from the mercenary.
Not always. Actually, I think it's passion. I think what separates the missionary from the mercenary is closer to my friend Reggie James's definition of taste. He wrote a response where he says taste is personalization. And taste and technology is utilizing the lineage of a practice that you have personalized towards some line of progress. So if your definition of taste is UX, UI, branding, and marketing, there's a lot of companies in Silicon Valley that are not deep tech companies that will kind of be competing on that level.
Yeah.
Reggie, as a believer more in deep tech and trying to argue that actually this definition of taste doesn't really account for people who are doing new things with code, says that it's not just that branding, it's this personalization, this moment of personalization that moves things towards some sort of progress, which
it's at the roots of
in my mind is mission driven, but could be enacted by a mercenary. It could start off under the tutelage of somebody like Steve Jobs and become the successor, and then also be maintained by the successor.
It can move both ways
person.
Too. Yeah.
There's also a good response by my friend Holland, who says that all that matters in software is exceptional product. So the reason I did not feel a need to do a response, other than I respect all of these people and I respect all these point of views, and I actually don't think they're all mutually exclusive, is because my theory of the taste economy always accounted for this. I basically say there's 3 tracks. There is the deep tech track that is not disrupted by the taste economy. Deep tech will always have a moat. Yes. Supply chain advantage will always have a moat.
Big T tech. What was that essay we talked about?
The third thing is the companies that fall outside of that, that's who's getting eaten, consumed. That's the people in the taste playing fields. and that could be operating at the branding level or it could be operating at the personalization level, which is more like Reggie's thesis. But I was like, okay, I'm actually reading this response and I'm reading the clapbacks. And I feel like my personal theory, I feel like it has enough flexibility that I've kind of accounted for this, which is like, yeah, actually, if you're doing deep tech, this isn't relevant to you. If you're doing American dynamism and you're making drones, and you're the only person with the government contract to do them, this isn't relevant to you. But if you're not, then this is probably relevant to you. And people are also like, well, how can you make this argument and not define taste at any point? But it's not about a definition of taste or whether taste is subjective or not. It's really a theory of distribution and value accrual. Because I'm saying anyone who falls out of the capital T tech camp or infrastructure camp, they have to operate as a media company.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of a nuance that if we're only saying Silicon Valley and where taste is going to operate in Silicon Valley, maybe it's been missed. I'm like Silicon Valley, yes, but also the wider culture and world of cultural production, which is what we talk about on Tasteland.
Yeah.
So this is really like well suited for our interests.
Yeah. This is maybe gauche of me to say, but when you were saying falling out, my mind went to the coconut tree. And I think part of what you're talking about is that like what taste is about is existing in the context of all that came before you, not only like more writ large, like, you know, like the space you're operating
I can't believe you're doing this
but
right
also
now.
your personal history. But also, I'm so sorry. But I think that, I mean, okay, it was a terrible transition maybe.
No,
I
like it. You're right.
Yeah. It's like, but it's like on both the like
you have to be able to remember back to the zip code.
Yes.
You have to be able to remember back to the zip code.
God.
I mean, there's one other thing that I flagged that has to do with print media and attention, but is more in the camp of publishing than
we're back to magazines now, folks.
Book publishing, actually. But a lot of these companies do both.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if you look at the Wikipedia page for Time Inc. or Condé Nast, it's really a record of mergers and unmergers and blocked mergers. So, I mean, maybe the nonfiction book...
Balkanization and carcinization.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the nonfiction book of the moment is not to be written about taste, but to be written about the power of mergers in driving culture and attention.
Well, that's kind of what that Triumph of the Yuppies book that I keep talking about on this podcast is about.
Really? Yeah, you have mentioned that.
I mentioned it like on 5 episodes.
So they're merger yuppies?
Yeah, I read it a while ago. Anyways.
They're yuppies that acquired power and status by working in the mergers and acquisitions.
Well, no. It's just that it's talking about like junk bonds and Mike Milken and like hostile takeovers. And it's not like the
that's right.
It, but
yeah.
Anyways.
Okay. That's maybe we'll do a merger episode. Or anyway.
We should merge with another podcast. Okay. Yeah, anyways. Of the elite college students who can't read books. This is
elite college students that can't read books. So basically what's happening is kids are getting to college. They are saying, allegedly, according to most of the sources in this book, that like they can't, they don't have the focus or the ability to read multiple books in the curriculum during the time frame that they're assigned. And a lot of them are used to reading shorter form things or excerpts. And one of the explanations that's offered is basically like, these are people who came up. Yeah, well, these are people who came up during a curriculum that was geared towards test taking. And there's not really any sort of test that can really, in a standardized way, like assess your ability to engage with a text like Crime and Punishment, other than reading comprehension. But the whole point of a standardized test is because it's standardized, they can only test you on your comprehension of text that can be contained within the test itself.
Yeah.
And I do buy that explanation. I saw an interesting tweet last night that I bookmarked and basically said these sort of technology gimmicks and like everyone getting a tablet and testing out different styles of curriculum and teaching. They're doing these experiments on like public school students, basically.
Yeah.
It's the poor students that are basically the guinea pigs for new types of testing, means testing,
futures are being played
curriculums.
with. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It is not kids in elite private schools. And I think that they probably could have broken this out even further to kids that are arriving at elite colleges from public schools and kids that are arriving at elite colleges from
elite schools,
from elite private schools. And I mean, my husband was privately educated. I was not up until college.
Mm-hmm. Same.
So I have an actual comparison within my relationship. Plus, his father worked for the school, so I know how, like, what the philosophy and approach of faculty is at a private school to preparing kids for college and placing them in certain colleges through their relationship with the admissions.
Yeah.
But if you don't have access to that, even in schools that are like testing optional, which some elite schools have become SAT optional, like if you are sort of on the border of being accepted and you're not at a private school where you feel like you just know 7 kids from this class are going to get into Brown, you kind of need to score well. Like, you still need to score well on the SATs, I think, as like it becomes like a attestation of your intelligence.
Yeah, it's like a baseline you have to hit.
Yeah, whether it's optional or not, because, and I think this was an interesting argument that was made around a lot of the like affirmative action stuff, that like if you remove race from admissions, they'll just use something else as an avatar.
Yeah, there's always something.
And that could make it even worse. If you remove standardized tests, somebody could make the argument that they'll use something else as an avatar that's even worse and less meritocratic. And that avatar could be, did this person get the same grades as somebody who went to a private school? Are you going to take the public school kid or the private school kid, and who can pay full price even? Some are not need blind, some are need informed.
Yeah. This is taking me back to the quote I brought up yesterday when we first tried to record this podcast, the Arthur Miller quote: "The history of man is his blundering attempt to form a society in which it pays to be good." You're not going to be able to do it, whether it's standardized test or race or like whatever, any of these things. It's never going to be a pure, good. I don't know if a meritocracy is inherently good, but it never will be. That doesn't exist.
The other thing I want to bring up, and I think this is a perfect thing to end the episode on, is the literary reference that Eric Tao makes in his like rousing speech is from a Dennis Johnson short story. He says the name of the short story in the episode, which is The Largesse of the Sea Maiden. And as you might recall, the last episode of the series is called Infinite Largesse. So I thought was a very interesting tie-in. But I don't know that he says, I don't know if they say Dennis Johnson or not.
I don't think they did.
Yeah. So it's written by Dennis Johnson. And would you believe where it was originally published?
In Time magazine?
The New Yorker.
Oh.
The New Yorker. So, all right, this is magazine supremacy again.
Yeah.
I went back and read it in the New Yorker after the episode. I'd never read it before. I haven't read any Dennis Johnson. Train Dreams has been on my list for a long time.
I have it on my bookshelf. I bought it recently.
Okay, well, maybe we'll do it. We'll both read Train Dreams and we'll do it.
That's
Train
a great
Dreams
idea.
episode.
Yes.
But I thought that could be a fun note to end on, because it all comes back to the magazine in the end.
That's perfect. This has been The Largesse of Tasteland. So thank you for listening.
There's our title. Thank you for listening. See you next week.